welcome to the English Hour. Today, we have a very exciting topic: how to speak English like a native. I'm thrilled to be joined by Jacob, who's here to share some of his insights and tips. Hi, Jacob.
Hey, Sophia, I'm really excited to be here, and I think we're going to have a great conversation about this. It's a question many learners have. How can I sound like a native speaker?
Absolutely. It's a huge goal for many people. They want to sound more fluent, confident, and natural in their conversations. So, let's start right at the beginning. What do you think is the most important thing to focus on if someone wants to sound like a native?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is pronunciation. A lot of people think grammar is the key, but if your pronunciation isn't clear, it can really affect how others understand you. Natives have a particular way of pronouncing words, linking sounds, and stressing syllables.
Yeah, pronunciation makes such a difference. It's not just about saying the words correctly, but also about understanding the rhythm and the flow of the language, right?
Exactly, native speakers have a natural rhythm when they speak. There are rises and falls in their voice. Certain words are stressed more than others, and they use connected speech where sounds flow together instead of being separated.
Can you give an example of connected speech?
Sure, let's take the phrase, "What do you want to do?" In natural speech, it would sound more like, "What do I want to do?" The words blend together, and you might not even hear every single sound. It's subtle, but it makes your speech sound a lot smoother.
I love that. And this is something that's so important to native speakers, but learners might not always be aware of it.
Right? A lot of times, native speakers focus so much on enunciating each word clearly that they miss out on these natural flowing patterns. But to sound like a native, you need to embrace connected speech.
That's so true. I think people get caught up in perfecting grammar, but it's all about how natural your speech is when you speak. It's a skill that takes time, but it's totally worth it.
Absolutely. And another huge part of sounding like a native is vocabulary. It's not just about knowing the right words, but using them in the right context with the right tone.
Oh, that's a big one. You can learn thousands of words, but if you don't know when or how to use them, it's tough to sound natural.
Exactly. Natives don't always use formal language or big, complex words. They use slang, idiomatic expressions, and informal language all the time. It's part of the culture.
I think that's where a lot of learners struggle. They focus too much on formal English and then feel stuck in conversations where they don't know the more casual terms.
Yes, and the beauty of slang is that it gives you a lot of personality in your speech. It makes you sound more like you're part of the group. Of course, you don't want to overdo it, but the occasional, cool, awesome, or chill can make your speech sound a lot more natural.
That's a great point. It's all about finding the balance between sounding fluent and still being yourself. Now, when it comes to understanding how natives speak, I think listening is key, right?
Oh, definitely. Listening is one of the best ways to learn how natives communicate. By hearing how they respond, how fast they talk, how they emphasize words, it gives you the blueprint for how to speak.
So, would you recommend watching a lot of English media, like movies, TV shows, and even YouTube videos?
100%. I always tell my students to immerse themselves in English by watching things like Friends, The Office, or even YouTube channels with informal conversations. You get to hear how real people talk, not scripted English, but everyday language.
And, what about mimicking the way they speak? Is it a good idea to repeat what you hear in media?
Absolutely. I love the technique of shadowing. This is where you repeat what the speaker says, trying to copy their exact pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. It's a really powerful way to improve your speaking skills and get closer to native pronunciation.
I've heard about shadowing. It sounds like a fun way to practice.
It is, it feels a little like acting because you're trying to become the person you're mimicking. But over time, it helps you get a feel for how native speakers structure their sentences and use tone.
That's so cool. I think a lot of people could benefit from this, especially if they want to sound more natural in conversations. But what about people who don't have the chance to speak to native speakers often? How can they still improve?
That's a great question. Even if you're not speaking with a native regularly, you can still practice by speaking with yourself. Find language partners online, use apps that connect you with people to practice speaking, or even record yourself talking about different topics.
I think speaking to yourself might sound a little weird at first, but it's such a great way to practice. You're still using the language, and it's less intimidating than speaking to someone else.
Exactly. And if you record yourself, you can listen back and spot areas where you can improve. It's like having your own personal teacher.
That's such a good idea. Let's dive a bit into thinking in English. Do you think that's important for sounding like a native?
Definitely. Native speakers don't translate their thoughts from another language, they just think in English. It's one of the most natural parts of speaking like a native. If you want to improve, try to eliminate the translation process in your head.
That's a huge shift for learners, isn't it? It's not just about knowing words, it's about thinking directly in English, without translating from your native language.
Yes. To do that, you can start small. Try thinking in English when you're going through your daily routines. If you're walking somewhere, describe what you see in English in your mind. It builds a natural connection to the language.
That's an awesome tip. It's little habits like these that really add up over time, right?
Exactly. The more you immerse yourself in English, the easier it becomes to think and speak like a native. It's all about building that mental connection.
I love that idea of creating those little habits. And while we're on the topic of immersion, what about reading? Do you think reading English books can help learners sound more like a native?
Absolutely. Reading is a fantastic way to improve vocabulary and understand sentence structure. But the key is to read things that are written in natural, conversational English rather than just formal texts. Novels, blogs, or even English comics can be great for this.
So, it's about choosing the right type of reading material. If someone picks up a lot of formal texts or textbooks, they might get stuck using very stiff academic language, right?
Exactly. You want to read things that reflect how people actually speak. That way, you're learning more natural phrasing and slang. For example, reading a novel by an author like John Green or watching YouTube channels where people have casual conversations, that's the stuff that teaches you real English.
That's a good point. I think a lot of learners forget that reading can be fun too. It doesn't have to be all about formal learning. It's about enjoying the process.
Right? Reading should be enjoyable. The more fun you have, the more likely you are to stick with it and pick up new words and phrases naturally.
I love that idea. Now, let's talk about mistakes. I think a lot of learners are afraid of making mistakes when speaking English. How do you handle mistakes? Especially when trying to sound like a native.
Honestly, I think the fear of mistakes holds a lot of people back. Native speakers make mistakes all the time, but they don't let it stop them from talking. The key is to embrace mistakes as part of the process. It's okay to mess up.
That's such an important message. A lot of people might think they have to be perfect. But making mistakes is part of learning any language, right?
Exactly. And you'll get better faster if you let go of that fear. When you make mistakes, you learn from them and get closer to speaking like a native. Native speakers might even use their mistakes to help others, like, oh, I meant to say this, and correct themselves mid-conversation.
Yes. It's about being comfortable with the process of learning. So, instead of worrying about making mistakes, focus on how you can improve each time you speak.
100%. And something else I always tell my students is don't compare yourself to native speakers. They've been speaking English since they were babies. Instead, compare yourself to who you were yesterday. Focus on your own progress.
That's such a healthy way to approach learning. Every small step forward is an achievement. And it's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent and enjoying the journey.
Exactly. Language is a lifelong journey, and the more you immerse yourself in it and practice, the closer you get to sounding like a native.
And I think it's also about being patient. Progress might feel slow at first, but it really does add up over time. Every time you practice, you're building a stronger foundation.
Absolutely. And let's not forget immersing yourself in the culture of English-speaking countries helps too. If you're familiar with the culture, the idioms, humor, and traditions, it'll make it easier to sound like a native because you'll understand the context behind certain phrases and expressions.
I love how you brought that up. It's not just about speaking the words, it's about understanding why natives say what they say and how it fits into their way of life.
Yes, language and culture are deeply connected. If you know the culture, you'll understand the humor, the references, and even the slang that might not make sense at first. It all ties in together.
Now, before we wrap up, Jacob, can you give our listeners a quick action plan for how they can start speaking like a native?
Sure thing, here's my quick action plan 1. Immerse yourself, watch TV shows, movies, and YouTube videos. Try shadowing native speakers. 2. Practice speaking daily even if it's just to yourself or a language partner. 3. Read more, choose books, blogs, or articles written in natural English. 4. Use slang and informal phrases, don't be afraid to learn casual language. 5. Be patient and persistent, language learning takes time, but consistency is key.
That's a great list. I think the biggest takeaway here is that you don't have to be perfect. You just need to keep practicing and enjoy the journey.
Exactly. Be patient with yourself and keep speaking, listening, reading, and enjoying English. Every day you'll get closer to sounding like a native.
That's so true. Jacob, it's been amazing having you on today. Your advice has been so practical and motivational. I'm sure our listeners will get a lot out of it.
Thank you so much, Sophia. It's always a pleasure to share tips that help people improve their English. I hope everyone out there feels encouraged to keep going.
And to all our listeners, remember, learning English is a marathon, not a sprint. Keep practicing, stay consistent, and soon, you'll find yourself speaking like a native. Jacob, let's dive deeper into the topic of pronunciation. I know many learners struggle with how to pronounce words like a native. What do you think are some of the most important tips to master pronunciation?
Great question. Pronunciation is tricky, but the key is to listen and mimic. I always tell my students, don't just learn the words, listen to how they're said. Pay attention to the rhythm, intonation, and stress in the sentence.
That's really important. Intonation plays a huge role in how natural you sound. So, it's not just about saying the words, but about understanding the melody of the language, right?
Exactly. Intonation is everything. In English, the meaning of a sentence can change just based on where you place stress. For example, I didn't say she stole the money can have different meanings depending on which word you stress. Native speakers naturally play with this melody when they speak.
That's so interesting. So, would you suggest learners practice listening to podcasts or watching TV shows and then trying to mimic the way the characters speak?
Yes, absolutely. Listening to native speakers in context helps you understand how English is spoken naturally. And then you can practice shadowing, which means repeating exactly what the speaker says, trying to match their tone, rhythm, and speed.
I love the sound of shadowing. It's like a workout for your mouth. How else can learners improve their pronunciation if they're practicing on their own?
Another great tip is to use online pronunciation tools like Forvo or Google Translate's audio feature. These tools let you hear how words are pronounced by native speakers, and you can even slow down the speed to catch every nuance.
That's super helpful. I think sometimes learners get frustrated when they can't quite pronounce a word correctly. But it's really about breaking it down and practicing consistently, right?
Exactly. It's all about breaking it into smaller chunks. Start with individual sounds, then move to syllables, and finally work on whole words and phrases. With enough practice, your mouth gets used to the new sounds.
That's such a helpful way of thinking about it step by step. Now, what about accent? Some learners want to sound like a particular accent: British, American, or Australian. What are your thoughts on that?
It's great to have a target accent, but I'd say focus more on being understandable rather than trying to mimic an accent perfectly. If you sound clear and natural, That's the most important thing.
That's such a refreshing perspective. So, it's more about clarity and communication, rather than worrying about having a specific accent.
Exactly. And of course, if you're interested in adopting a certain accent, go for it. But always remember that communication is the main goal. If people understand you, that's a big win.
I think a lot of learners forget that. They get so caught up in sounding exactly like a native speaker. But at the end of the day, it's about connecting with others and getting your message across.
Definitely. And one thing I've noticed is that learners who focus on fluency rather than perfection tend to speak with more confidence, which actually helps them sound more natural in the long run.
Confidence, yes. I've heard you mention this before. How do you think learners can build their confidence when speaking?
Confidence comes from consistent practice and small wins. If you keep practicing every day and recognize when you've improved, it builds momentum. For example, celebrating when you've successfully explained something in English without hesitation, or when someone compliments your pronunciation.
Those little wins are so powerful, aren't they? I think learners can sometimes get discouraged if they don't see big changes right away. But as you said, it's the small improvements that make all the difference.
Exactly. And remember, everyone goes through those stages. There are times when you feel like you're not improving, but then, out of nowhere, you'll realize just how much you've grown. That's the beauty of the process.
You're right. It's important to be kind to yourself and give credit for those small wins. Now, Jacob, let's shift gears a bit. What about the role of grammar? Can a learner focus too much on grammar and not enough on speaking naturally?
Oh, definitely. Grammar is important, but when you focus too much on it, you might find yourself overthinking every sentence. Native speakers don't always speak perfect grammar in every sentence. They break rules sometimes, especially in casual conversation.
That's a great point. It can be easy to get caught up in making sure every sentence is grammatically correct. But at the end of the day, communication is what matters more.
Absolutely. And once you've got a good grasp of the basics, grammar can come in naturally as you practice. The more you speak, the more your brain will automatically start structuring sentences in a grammatically correct way.
So, it's about finding a balance. Focus on speaking first, then improve your grammar along the way through practice.
Exactly. And remember, no one is perfect, even native speakers, they make mistakes too. So, don't be afraid to speak just because your grammar might not be perfect yet.
It's so reassuring to hear that. I think that's one of the things that holds learners back, the fear of making mistakes. But if we embrace those mistakes, we grow even faster.
That's the spirit. Mistakes are learning opportunities, not something to fear. The more mistakes you make, the more you're learning and getting closer to fluency.
I love that mindset, Jacob. Now, what about practical tips for learners who want to start using English in everyday situations? How can they incorporate it into their daily routine?
One thing I recommend is changing your environment to be more English friendly. Change your phone or computer settings to English. Follow English accounts on social media, and try to think in English throughout the day.
That's such a simple but powerful strategy. By surrounding yourself with English, you're training your brain to think in the language more naturally.
Exactly. And another tip is to use English in real-world situations. Even if you're just ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions, practice those everyday conversations. The more you use English, the more comfortable it becomes.
Real life practice is priceless. It helps you build confidence and it shows you how English is used in the real world, not just in textbooks.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to make mistakes in those situations, because real people don't care about perfection. They just want to communicate.
I think that's a great note to end on for today. It's all about communication, confidence, and consistency. Jacob, I've really enjoyed hearing all of your tips so far. Let's talk about something a bit more challenging now. How do you stay motivated when learning English feels overwhelming?
Motivation can definitely be tricky at times. One thing that really helps is setting small, achievable goals. For example, Aim to learn 5 new words a day or have a 10-minute conversation in English every day. These small wins add up over time and keep you motivated.
Setting those mini goals seems like a smart way to avoid feeling discouraged. It's all about progress, not perfection, right?
Exactly. And I always encourage my students to track their progress, even if it's just in a notebook or a journal. Look back at where you were a month ago, and you'll be surprised at how much you've learned.
That's such a great idea. Sometimes we don't realize how far we've come. What about external motivation? Do you think surrounding yourself with English speaking friends or joining communities can help?
Absolutely, being around people who are also learning or speaking English can create a sense of accountability. There are plenty of online communities where learners can connect, practice speaking, and support each other.
I think that's important. Having a support system makes the journey less lonely. It's also fun to share milestones and challenges with others who understand.
Definitely. And learning together can push you to keep going. Sometimes a little healthy competition can work wonders too.
Haha, I love that. Friendly competition to see who can learn the most vocabulary or hold the longest conversation in English. That sounds motivating. Now, speaking of speaking, what's your take on using English in social media? Do you think it's a good idea to immerse yourself through social platforms?
Oh, 100%. Social media is an amazing tool for learning. You can follow accounts that post in English, watch videos, and even engage in conversations in the comments. Plus, social media often uses the informal language that native speakers use in real life.
That's a great point. Social media gives you access to real-world English, like slang and expressions that textbooks don't always teach. It's like a window into how people actually speak.
Exactly. And you can learn a lot just from reading memes, tweets, or watching short videos. The more you see and hear English used in everyday contexts, the more it becomes part of your vocabulary and speaking style.
And I love how accessible that is. No need for formal lessons, just scroll through Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube, and you're soaking in English. What about content like movies or series? Are they useful for learners?
Absolutely. Watching movies and series is a fantastic way to hear native speakers in different contexts. It helps you pick up natural expressions, as well as improve your listening skills. I always tell learners to turn on subtitles in English, if possible, so they can see how the words are written and match them with the sounds.
Great advice. Subtitles are so helpful, especially when you're trying to understand the nuances of pronunciation. Do you think it's better to watch shows with English subtitles, or should you try to watch without them?
It depends on your level. If you're a beginner, English subtitles are a great tool. As you progress, try to watch without them to improve your listening skills. But don't be discouraged if you miss some words. Rewind and listen again to get the hang of it.
I love that approach. It's like a balance between challenging yourself and still having support when you need it. Now, I'm curious, do you think learners should focus on formal or informal language when starting out? Should they be aiming for proper English, or should they dive into conversational, everyday speech?
Great question. I'd say a mix of both. When you're first starting, it's essential to know the basics of grammar and structure. But once you're comfortable with that, I encourage learners to focus on conversational English because that's what will help you in daily life.
So, we shouldn't be afraid to learn slang and informal phrases, even early on.
Exactly, slang is a part of the language, and using it correctly can help you sound more natural. But of course, it's important to understand the context, know when to use formal English in professional settings, and when informal language is appropriate in casual conversations.
That makes a lot of sense. So, English isn't just about the rules. It's about knowing the right time and place for different styles of speech.
Exactly. And one thing I always remind my students is that language is constantly evolving. What's considered formal or informal can change over time. That's why it's so important to keep up with modern English by watching current media or interacting with native speakers.
That's a great point. The language does evolve, and so much of that comes from real world usage. Now, we've been talking a lot about practical tips. But what about mindset? How can learners develop the right mindset to succeed in English?
Mindset is everything. First and foremost, I'd say embrace the process. Learning a language isn't easy, it takes time and effort. But it's important to have patience with yourself. Celebrate the progress you've made, and don't compare yourself to others.
That's such an important reminder. I think a lot of learners get discouraged when they see others speaking so fluently, but everyone has their own journey.
Absolutely. And remember, it's okay to make mistakes. Each mistake is a lesson that brings you one step closer to fluency. The key is to be persistent, enjoy the process, and keep practicing.
That's fantastic advice. So, it's really about enjoying the ride and being okay with the ups and downs along the way.
Yes, and stay curious. Always ask questions, seek out new resources, and never stop exploring the language. The more curious you are, the more you'll learn.
I love that idea. Curiosity is such a big part of learning anything. And with English, the world is your classroom.
Exactly. English is everywhere, and it's just waiting for you to dive in and explore.
I think that's a perfect note to end this session on. Jacob, thanks so much for sharing all of your insights today. I've got to say, Jacob, I've learned so much today. But I'm curious, what's your perspective on immersion? Do you think it's necessary to be surrounded by native speakers to truly learn English?
Great question. Immersion is definitely one of the most effective ways to learn, but it doesn't mean you have to move to an English-speaking country. With the internet, you can immerse yourself in the language from anywhere in the world. Listening to podcasts, watching shows, and even joining virtual meetups can give you that immersion experience.
So, immersion is really about creating an English-rich environment, right? Even if you're not in a native-speaking country, you can still immerse yourself digitally.
Exactly. You can surround yourself with English every day in small ways. The more you expose yourself to it, the more natural it will become. And even if you're not speaking with a native speaker, you're still practicing comprehension, listening, and expanding your vocabulary.
I love that. It's about creating those opportunities, even in everyday life. Do you think there's a certain time when learners should start focusing on speaking with native speakers? Or is it something that can happen from the very beginning?
Speaking with native speakers can happen at any time, but I do recommend building some basic foundation first. Once you have a basic understanding of grammar and vocabulary, speaking with native speakers can be a huge boost to your confidence. They'll give you real-time feedback and help you understand nuances in the language.
That makes sense. It's like walking before running. You don't want to feel overwhelmed, but once you're ready, those conversations will really push you forward.
Exactly. And don't worry about making mistakes. Native speakers are usually very understanding, especially when they know you're learning. Most of them appreciate the effort and are happy to help.
That's comforting to know. And I think that's something a lot of learners fear, the fear of making mistakes. But you're right, mistakes are part of the process, and they help you grow.
Absolutely. Think of mistakes as stepping stones. Every time you make one, you learn something new. The fear of making mistakes should never stop you from trying.
Very true. And I also think it's important to celebrate the small wins, right? Sometimes, the biggest motivator comes from recognizing how far we've come.
Yes, celebrate every achievement, no matter how small. Whether it's learning a new word, having a short conversation, or even understanding a full sentence in a movie, those are all victories. Don't wait until you're fluent to feel proud of your progress.
I love that, celebrating every step of the journey. It's the small things that build up over time. Now, what would you say to someone who's struggling to stay consistent with their English practice? How can they make it a daily habit?
One of the best things you can do is make it part of your routine. Just like brushing your teeth, make English practice a daily habit. Set aside a small amount of time each day, even if it's just 10 to 15 minutes. Consistency is more important than how much time you spend in one go.
So, It's better to practice every day for a little bit, rather than cramming all at once, right?
Exactly, short, regular practice sessions are much more effective than occasional, long sessions. And as you get more comfortable, you can increase the time gradually.
That's a great tip. Consistency really is key. I think we've covered so much valuable information already. Before we wrap things up, let's talk about something fun. How can learners inject some creativity into their English learning process?
Oh, I love this. Creativity is so important. I always recommend learners to do things that are fun for them, like writing short stories, making videos in English, or even playing word games. The more enjoyable it is, the more likely you are to stick with it.
That's awesome. And I think when you find something fun and creative, it doesn't even feel like studying. It's just a natural way to learn.
Absolutely. And you can also combine hobbies with learning. If you love music, for example, learn the lyrics of your favorite English songs. Or if you're into gaming, try playing English language games. The key is to find what excites you and make it part of your learning process.
Yes, it's like blending learning with passion. It's so much easier to stay motivated when you're enjoying what you're doing. Now, before we end, Jacob, can you give us a final tip for anyone who's just starting their English learning journey?
Of course, my final tip would be don't be afraid to take that first step. Start speaking, start listening, start reading, and most importantly, don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's all part of the journey. Keep a positive mindset and enjoy the process. You're on your way to fluency.
That's such a great note to end on, embracing the process and starting today. Jacob, thank you so much for all your incredible advice and insights. I've learned a ton. And I'm sure our listeners have too. I've really enjoyed this conversation so far. Jacob, there's so much to think about when it comes to learning English. But let's shift gears a bit. What about learners who feel discouraged when they hit a plateau? When they feel like they're not making progress anymore.
The dreaded it happens to everyone at some point, no matter how advanced you are. The key is not to be discouraged. When you reach a plateau, it's often a sign that your brain is absorbing everything you've learned and is working to solidify it.
That's reassuring. It's like your brain is just catching up with all the knowledge. So, what can learners do when they feel stuck in that phase?
Great question. One thing I recommend is to change up your routine. If you've been practicing grammar for a while, maybe switch to listening to podcasts or reading stories in English. Engaging in different types of activities can reignite your learning and spark fresh interest.
So, it's about shaking things up, right? Doing something different to keep your brain engaged.
Exactly. And sometimes taking a break from intense study can be helpful. It's like exercising. You can't train hard every day. A little rest gives your mind time to process, and then when you return, you'll often find you've made more progress than you realize.
That's a fantastic point. So, if someone's feeling stuck, stepping back and giving themselves some space could be just what they need. Now, let's talk about listening. How important is listening in language acquisition?
Listening is incredibly important. When you listen, you're training your brain to understand how words sound in context. It's not just about learning the vocabulary, it's about hearing the rhythm, the intonation, and the natural flow of the language. This helps with pronunciation and comprehension too.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's not just about listening to the words, but also understanding how they fit together naturally.
Exactly. And it's important to listen to different types of English. You can listen to podcasts, TV shows, movies, or even YouTube videos in English. Every speaker has a different style and accent, and that variety will help you understand English in real-world situations.
I love that. So, don't just stick to one source. The more variety, the better.
Definitely. And speaking of variety, you can also practice listening with subtitles in English. At first, it might be tempting to use your native language subtitles, but English subtitles will force your brain to connect words with their meaning immediately.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. It sounds like an amazing technique to improve your listening skills. Plus, it helps with reading speed and comprehension, right?
Absolutely, it's a powerful combination. The more you challenge yourself, the better you'll get. Over time, you'll notice your listening and reading skills improve, and you'll start recognizing phrases and expressions you wouldn't have before.
Now, I'm curious, what about speaking? A lot of learners find it difficult to speak, especially with native speakers. Any tips on how to overcome that fear of speaking?
Yes, speaking can be intimidating, especially when you're worried about making mistakes. My advice would be to start speaking in safe spaces. Whether it's with a language partner, a teacher, or even just talking to yourself in the mirror, the more you speak, the more confident you'll become.
Speaking to yourself in the mirror. That's a fun idea. It's like practicing for a real conversation, without the pressure of someone judging you.
Exactly, it helps you get comfortable with forming sentences and speaking out loud. And when you do finally talk to others, you'll feel more at ease. And remember, every conversation is a chance to learn and improve.
I think that's the key: practice, practice, practice. So, whether it's with yourself, a language partner, or a tutor, the more you engage, the more confident you'll feel.
And don't forget about recording yourself. It can be intimidating at first, but listening to your recordings can help you spot areas for improvement and track your progress.
That's such a great suggestion. It gives you a chance to hear how you sound and make adjustments. You can even compare older recordings with newer ones to see how far you've come.
Exactly. And even if you don't like the sound of your voice at first, that's part of the process. We all go through that. But once you get used to it, you'll be more focused on the content rather than how you sound.
I love how you're making this whole process seem so approachable. It's all about small steps and gradual improvement, right?
Exactly. The most important thing is to stay consistent and be patient with yourself. Fluency doesn't happen overnight, but with effort, you'll definitely get there. And enjoy the process.
Well said, Jacob. Fluency is a journey, not a destination. And I think that's a perfect note to end on for today, at least. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode on how to become a native English speaker. Jacob, thank you so much for sharing all of your amazing insights and tips with us today.
It was my pleasure, Sophia. I hope everyone found these tips helpful. And remember, the journey to fluency is all about consistency and having fun with it.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, I hope you're feeling inspired to keep practicing and continue your English learning journey. Don't forget, every small step counts. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the English Hour. We'll see you next time with more great conversations. Keep learning, keep growing, and most importantly, keep speaking English.